pleasure was found there. If you wanted to do something crazy, if you wanted to do something hush-hush, something that people would judge you for, something that people, you didn't want them to know about it, you go to Corinth because no one's going to judge you there. You're going to find tons of people that are probably doing much more heinous things than what you want to do, which is both this balance of you know shame and, well, people are worse than I am, so I don't have to feel as bad as I do, which is American culture 100%. Let me surround myself with people who are just as disturbed as I am in an area, whether it be in bars or wherever it may be. Heroin addicts, whatever. Let me just gather people around me that are in equal, they're after the same pursuit. And then I can have myself lullabied that it's all okay because someone else is doing it. And then you look across the street and you say, but we're not murderers. I just want to feel good. That person's murdering someone. We're not Hitlers of the world. There's always someone worse. In Corinth, it's like, what would that even be? It's scary. It's scary that the neighbors would look and say, well, I'm not as bad as that guy. It's like, what is that guy doing? Because after we get into some of this, it's very disturbing. So to quote that guy, he says, the ideal of the Corinthians was the reckless development of the individual. The merchant who made his gain by all and every means, that means lying, cheating, stealing. The man of pleasure, surrendering himself to every lust. The athlete steeled to every bodily exercise and proud of his physical strength. And the true Corinthian types, in a word, the man who recognized no superior and no law but his own desire. Does that not sound very familiar to where we're at? Does that not sound very familiar to what people are like today? The sinfulness even leaked into the religious realm. People who claimed to be religious, they were serving the great temple of Aphrodite, and its many cult prostitutes attracted many to come and spend their money in that city. The temple of Aphrodite was so rich it owned more than 1,000 temple slaves who were enacting as its priests and would sit there before Aphrodite, both men and women dedicated to this goddess. And it was said that they worked around the clock providing offerings to the false god they served. What do you think those offerings were? Sex. That's what they're doing. They're prostitutes. They're literally, you want to serve the god of love and lust and Aphrodite? You want to serve this god? Well, you come before this temple and you grab one of these priests and you go and you deliver that sacrifice. That's what these people did. I mean, there is so much far-reaching in that like if you think about what is going on with that mindset, which is I want to do what I want to do, but may it be under religion so that I feel good about myself and yet still are pleasing the flesh. Does that sound familiar? A people who just want to feel good about being saved or being religious, yet they're only doing destruction to their body. They're not actually seeking the holy God of the Bible. They're not actually seeking truth. They just want to be delusional. They just want to feel good and to call themselves religious. If that's the religious groups, then one can hardly grasp those who weren't religious at all. Corinth had a phrase that became popular because of what went on there. Just like our modern day in Las Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, very much the same with Corinth, but it was a well-known phrase, and it went like this: "Not for every man is the voyage to Corinth." That's what the sailors would say. Not for every man. He's like, they would tell their young men, and they would tell whoever would hear, not everyone's able to go on this trip. Because most of the men that went didn't come back to their families. They lost everything. They gave everything, and they stayed there. Or they lost everything and crawled home, however long that took, and lost their whole livelihood, and everything about them was destroyed. It's not for every man to voyage to Corinth. It's a warning. I think the same thing could be said about Las Vegas today. Or, these places around the world that are just open in the streets. horrible things that are going on. It's like, don't go there. The proverb, King Solomon, he warns his sons. He said, you know the street that the prostitute is on, son. Don't go down that street. There is nothing for you there. Oh, Dad, I'll go to that market. Go to the other market. Don't go to the Dollar General. Go over here. Go to this one. You don't need to even turn down that street because you know what's down there. It's not for every man to go on that street. In the same way, it's this warning. It's not for every man is the voyage to Corinth. Another phrase that comes out of the city was to call someone a Corinthian. That was about the lowest thing you could be called if you're not actually one. You know, what you're referring to, and you're like, you're a Corinthian. It's derogatory. To Corinthicize became a popular Greek phrase that meant go to the devil. So you can see how that would work, because we have a phrase a lot like that. I'm sure you could think about it. It doesn't take your imagination very much. But go to the devil. So it could either be, hey, why don't you Corinthicize yourself? Go to the devil, or don't go to the devil. Don't go that direction. Don't do those things. That's not who you are. In fact, in that part of the world, if you were referred to as a Corinthian girl, that became widely recognized as a prostitute. Not even just in that area, but all around, whether you were in or out of the city. Anytime there was a character in a play, because that was their main entertainment. Anytime there was a main character in a play that was known as a Corinthian, they were always a drunk or a very, very immoral person. That's the representation of them. And you know what's sad is in a lot of countries, that's what they do with Americans. That's really sad. But if you go to other countries, the way that they look at us, the way that they claim we all are, which is not true, but this general, notion of who we are, they represent us as these out-of-control people, these uneducated people, or whatever else. And that may not be as true, but with Corinthians, it's like, how could they even argue it? They would look around and be like, yeah, that's 9 out of 10 people. That's who they are. And they would laugh, and they would say, that's true. So let's wrap up here. So the date and time of the book was about 55 to 56 A.D. The Apostle Paul came here around the year 51 A.D. and preaches the gospel of Jesus Christ, and he establishes this thriving church in Acts 18, 1 through 4. And Paul visits the Corinthians on his second tour of preaching, and he had entered the city alone, awaiting the arrival of his traveling companions, Timothy and Silas, who were strengthening the church in Philippi and Thessalonica in Acts 17. Paul remained in the city of Corinth for about 2 years and then left for Ephesus, eventually making it back to Judea, Acts 18. The epistle to the Corinthians was written by Paul while at the city of Ephesus on his third tour of preaching. 1 Corinthians 16, 8 through 9 states, "But I will tarry at Ephesus until Pentecost, for a great door and effectual is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries." So that's when he most likely wrote it, in AD 55 to 56. The letter to the Corinthian brethren was an obvious response to 2 letters Paul had received during his 3-year stay in Ephesus. Paul refers to a letter he had received from the household of Chloe, and we'll get to that when we get into the letter, explaining the contentions among the brethren there. That's 1 Corinthians 1, verse 11. Again, in 1 Corinthians 7:1, he alludes to a letter that reached his hands that was written by the church in Corinth. These 2 letters outline the sinful behavior and the sinful directions of the Corinthians and where they were headed. So Paul was informed of their problems, and he also had the Holy Spirit, so he was very much informed with their problems. And he is going to deal with these vile conditions within the city and these false teachers that brought evil influences. He's going to deal with what's crept into the church and has loudly busted down the front door and made itself home. He's going to deal with these issues. And we'll just list some of those, and then we'll be done. Division in the church, that's what he's going to deal with from chapter 1 to chapter 4. Immoral behavior in the church, pretty much the whole letter, but especially in chapter 5 and chapter 6. Marriage in chapter 7 meets sacrifice to idols in chapter 8 through chapter 11. Disorder in the public worship, chapter 11 to chapter 14. Doubting the resurrection, chapter 15. And the conclusion. He kind of wraps up the letter. And so that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to look at. And I finished right a little over time. But that is the introduction to 1 Corinthians. We're going to jump in to the letter next week, God willing. So read probably all of chapter 1, but we will certainly not be done with chapter 1 next week. I don't know what pace we'll always move at, but especially as we get going in chapter 1, we're going to take our time in the first couple verses. So read those and be ready next week. I appreciate your time. I'm sorry this class was more of a lecture and not much of a question type of class, but when we press forward, it will be much more back and forth, and you're always free to make comments in class. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. You're dismissed.